Conas T, how are ye? Welcome to the Candlelit Tales Podcast. Thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us. And thank you so much, Rue, as well. My name is Sorcha. We are talking in this episode about the collaboration that we have just finished doing with the Embers Collective, where we echoed their stories with tales from Irish myth. So thank you for joining us. And today we're going to talk about the Devils Harp and the King's Violin. So, Sarah, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's really nice to meet you. We were talking to Sam. Myself and Aaron were catching up with Sam on Saturday, and you're one of the Embers who we haven't worked with before. So it's really nice to meet you and really nice to collaborate with you. So would you want to maybe say a little bit about yourself and how you got into this?
Sure. Well, first of all, it's really lovely to meet you guys too. And it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, I've been with the Embers quite a few years now. I went along to see one of their gigs, and we had a mutual friend, Sean, who performed with them and who knew me through storytelling. And they asked me to come and do a gig, and I just started asking for more gigs. I think I was just really, really super keen, and I was like, yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, I'll do that one too. So probably a bit embarrassing, but yeah, it sort of went from there. And then the boys asked if I wanted to be a core Ember member, and I said, yeah, that's what I'm here for. That's what I've been trying to do.
They finally got the hint.
Yeah, I think but if you hang around for long enough, I found that eventually people just have to let you be a part of it. So yeah, that's.
It worked for me with Candlelit Tales, so yeah.
Just keep being there until they have to.
No, you can't get rid of me.
Amazing. And yeah, Rue, was this your first time telling a story on the Candlelit Tales podcast?
It is, yeah.
That's wild, because you've been this is just for people who only know us through the podcast. It's a little bit of a different thing, because obviously you've been doing music for the podcast for ages, and you've been primarily doing it for most of 2021. But you've also been a storyteller with Candlelit Tales for years. Do you want to just kind of give people a little bit about your music story evolution?
Music story.
I don't know. Music to storyteller and storyteller to music. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah. Well, similar to Sarah, I just kept hanging around. They couldn't get rid of me. Yeah, they accepted it eventually. And yeah, at some point in that, because I started off as a musician for Candlelit Tales, but at some point in that, every now and again, there was just a need for a storyteller, and I would give it a go. In live settings, and it has never failed to scare the living shit out of me, but it's a good buzz all the same. And this is just my first time to do it on the podcast, to do a recorded version of it, which was a bit less intimidating, really, because you've got editing on your side. You can say a line again if you make balls, but so yeah, that's about it.
I like how you're both making it sound like the two of you were weird stalkers who bullied us into friendship, which was not actually the experience from my side at all.
It's a fun story. Come on, she started. I'm just jumping on it.
I know. I'm sure
to it, I suppose. It's self-deprecating, but yeah, there's a truth.
Exactly. I just want to say that I'm sure that I do not co-sign that narrative, and I'm sure that Lonan and Sam wouldn't either.
Maybe not to my face.
I'm just putting it out there because it's funny.
Yes, absolutely. So Sarah, tell us a little bit about the story that you chose, the Devils Violin. This was wild and creepy and kind of visceral. I listened to it thinking that I knew what it was about, and then it got a lot more gruesome than I thought it was going to get. I thought it was going to be buried them under the tree and then made the instrument out of the tree and then it talks. But no, this was visceral.
Yeah, I know. I think visceral is definitely the word, isn't it? And it's I've spoken about this story before, and when I've been asked, why did you choose to tell it, I've said I don't know, because it really disturbs me. It really bothers me as a story, and I actually really struggle with gruesome material and darkness. So I don't know. I still don't quite know why I did it to myself. The first couple of times I told it, I had huge issues doing it. It didn't feel like great to do. But it's one of those stories that I've been aware of for ages. So I think I must have heard other storytellers tell it or talk about it, and it actually sort of resurfaced in my mind when I was working on another story, which is really related to yours, actually, Rue, when I was listening, because it's I was working on one of those singing bone stories where there's sibling rivalry. So it's either two sisters or two brothers, and there's jealousy either over a lover, or I don't know, a crown or something like this, and one sibling murders the other, and an instrument is created from their bones, or or a reed that grows from their body, and it speaks the truth. So I was working on one of those stories, and as a footnote, when I was reading versions and versions of it, it mentioned the Devils Violin, and I was like, oh yeah, I think I do want to tell it. But I think I've made it more gruesome. Like I mean, I think I've actually made it harder for myself, because all that stuff with her little brother and sister and the guts and the tongues, yeah, I don't know why I did that. I don't think it needs to be as awful. Like, it really doesn't need to be as like bloodthirsty, I suppose. But yeah, when I was working on it and I was struggling, somebody said to me, maybe you love it because she gets to keep her whole family. She takes her family with her into this object. So, and I suppose that's what we often do when we're making something. You infuse it with the ones that you love, and so maybe that's what it's about for you. And I was like, yeah, that does sound better, but that does sound more beautiful and more comfortable with my choice, if that's the case. But yeah, it's one of those stories that I think maybe I'll tell differently if I keep on telling it, like as the years go on, but I'm not sure.
I think it's kind of, that's one of the nice things about telling stories, is that you never have to pin them down. I think if you're writing a story, you have to decide at some point, this is the way that this story ends, so this is the way that this story goes. Whereas when you're telling stories and you're going to tell them again, I really appreciate that kind of, might make it a little less gross next time, might make it a little more gross another time. Like you can decide on things live, which is really, I think it's really cool, because I don't like finishing things and making them definitive and kind of closing them down like that. So it's interesting that you were saying that.
No, I think
actually saw you tell that story live a couple of years ago in London, in Clapham. I did, yeah.
Oh wow,
it was really cool. I was delighted when it came up in this, because I recognized it from then.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if it's changed much since. I can't remember that. I can't remember that level of detail, but yeah, I was delighted to hear it again. It's a really cool story.
Oh wow, cool. That is, I think it's exactly that, like, because if you let them live, they do change. And actually, I've especially stuff that when I first started doing this, when I worked on, I think I set things way too much, because out of insecurity and wanting to know what I was going to say. So I think I've got stories that have got stuck, and I can't move them on, because I've set them like in the language so rigidly that it's a real effort. And now I feel like that's quite a shame, because I can't get them to move. Do you know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. I think that's one of the things that we like in our group. One of the things we do then is we give it to another storyteller. Like if I get stuck on a story like that, I'll give it to Aaron or I'll give it to Rue, and I go, you do it and see what you do on it, because they'll see a different thing in it.
Yeah.
And they'll do it a different way. And then usually by the time I hear somebody else tell it a couple of times, I'll go, I don't want it back now. Fuck off. Giz it. Because
I love that. That is such a great idea.
Something else will come up, and something else will, and like, because we used to do a set of stories there was a time when we were doing a monthly show. We do the same set of stories maybe 4 times in different venues, and like that was really a part of that, was kind of like, you know, figure out the story, tell it a couple of times, give it to somebody else, maybe tell it again at the end, but like keeping that kind of that thing of like, oh, because it can really, I think it can really happen in a group where a story can become like, this is my story that I tell, and I like it, and I've gotten good at it, and everyone kind of thinks of it as a Sarah story or as a Rue story now, and like, and I know exactly what you mean about it getting stuck like that. What do you think, Rue?
Yeah, I mean, that's always been something that's really impressed me about like yourself and Aaron's ability to just like, you know, have an argument about a story and then decide to like change the teller last minute and stuff like that. And yeah, I think it's a great ability, and it really keeps the storyteller on their toes, and it keeps the story fresh, and it's a great thing to do.
Yeah, I think and it stops that kind of possessiveness like over it as well, because I think you can get a bit like, oh, I do this like this, and actually you cut yourself off from other, like finding other stuff in it, you know?
Yes, definitely. So tell us a little bit about the King's Harp, Rue, that you decided to echo this story with.
Yeah, sure. Well, the thing that really grabbed me about Sarah's story was that idea of the musical instrument that has this gruesome origin, or the musical instrument that tells a secret when played, and that brought to mind Lowry Lynchock for me. And so like that was for me that was the hook of the story that I wanted to echo, but like in devising a version of this story, I also wanted to kind of match Sarah's tone and that very sinister and gruesome thing that was going on, and to do that, I kind of brought in a good bit about like Lowry Lynchock's backstory and his origin story and how he became the king and stuff. Whereas the bulk of the story is the whole thing of the king with the donkey's ears and his harpist, the harp, you know, like telling the king's secret to the court and all that crack. And I've always kind of been bothered by that story, in that I was telling this story at work recently, and we were talking about it afterwards, and we were a bit like, the poor barbers, you know, like he kills this succession of barbers, and then it's just kind of at the end of the story, it's just kind of like, and the king learned his lesson and everything was grand, lol. And I wasn't happy with that.
No,
you know?
it's so weird.
Because
it's weird. That thing of like, and nobody was harmed at all except all the barbers that he murdered and threw in a ditch. Like, it's a really interesting one in terms of like, because I think that's something that I was thinking of when you were talking as well, Sarah, about like the gruesomeness of the story and like the gruesomeness of kind of fairy tales. Like, I think when we tell them with children in mind and kind of skirt over those sorts of things, like, hey, this king did a murder, like a lot of them, and he didn't seem to mind. I think we lose some really interesting stuff, which is like, well, what is this story saying about like who is valued and who is not valued in this society? Like, is it okay to kill servants with impunity, and why is that okay, and who says it's okay? Like, that's a kind of, whereas when you tell that story of Larry Lynchock, which is, it usually is told for children, is it's very kind of sanitized, and it's very like, yeah, and then it was all fine. And you know, I think as you're pointing out, Rue, like it's not fine, and it's
glaring. It's glaring, like and I had to do something with that to reconcile that in order to take on the story, you know.
Yes.
So like my take on it was that it's not fine. It was never fine, and that in Lowry Lynchock's mind, it was fine, and that shows his values, and that shows something about him as a person. And I was through the story, I was trying to imply a fairly high degree of sociopathy in his character, you know, that like he would see people's reactions and be able to glean information on, but there's an essential lack of empathy and humanity there. Possibly as a result of the traumatic incident from his childhood where his dad was murdered and he was made to eat his dad's heart now. So yeah, it wasn't okay. It was never okay. So that was part of my story. And I had Larry killed at the end. You know?
Yeah.
Because I tried to find out what his death story was. I couldn't find a story, but like the death information that I found was that he was killed by his cousin, Quayle's son. So I just kind of I made up how it happened, but that was the information that I found, and I thought that rounded things off. Nice.
I liked that because it then became about like the start of the story had a nice little it had a nice little payoff. Where it was like, oh yeah, Quayle had a son, and that was there. And as often happens in Irish myth, and I think in a lot of myths, those threads are left to dangle a little bit. So it's really nice. That was a really nice little tie off of like, and this guy from the start of the story, he came back and killed him. And this is the legacy of this terrible, terrible family that murder each other and, you know, set each other on fire and feed their hearts to each other's children. Is that, one of his relatives killed him then because they're the family that murder their family. It's 100%. So had you heard that story before, Sarah?
No, I hadn't, but I was I'm just laughing because when I was listening to it, I was scribbling down notes and my notes are like, wow, fuck. Sorry, can I swear? Like,
you can swear in our podcast. That's fine.
Like, fuck. Oh, right. So when his mother sacrificed herself, again, I was just sort of out loud scribbling things down, and I was so interested with that like revelation at the end and how it happened, and him having the horse's ear and suddenly and I was like, gosh, so the secret doesn't matter. It's just a great relief, it's just a great relief, but it's not because, and then I thought that was. It just went everywhere. Like I loved it. And I was because I think I was reading the other day a bit of it's King Midas as well, isn't it? And Follow with the donkey's ears. It's that same story in a different
yes. We mentioned this when we were talking to Sam on Saturday because the idea of story tennis, that you could actually keep this echo going, like send it back to you for King Midas and then send it back to us for something else. Like there's a kind of an interesting like little kernel of what if we just kept doing this for another few rounds and see how far we get before we start repeating ourselves, which I think is kind of fascinating because also like with and this is again, I was saying to Aaron about this, like he was echoing a story of Sam's and he picked the love story aspect to echo, and I was kind of like, I think if I was doing it, I would have picked the journey aspect to echo. And I think like with this story, the Devils Violin, like definitely not like to disagree or anything like that, but like there's also kind of ones, there's a whole load of devil folk tales in Irish, more in folklore than in myth, but like the devil is a real figure, like he turns up and makes deals, and like the story of where the jack-o'-lantern comes from is
Stingy Jack was probably the main contender, but Lowry had the edge for me because of the musical instrument thing. I was really taken by the idea of the musical instrument thing. So yeah.
100%. It's just, I just think it's really interesting to kind of think about, like, there's so many different ways you could echo these different things,
Yeah, for sure.
I think that's that is like a really good experiment to try. Like how far, can how many go? Echoes? And I was so interested when I was listening to it, like I said, because the reason that I tell that story is because I was looking at another story, which is very much an echo of your story, I think, with the singing bones and everything. So, yeah.
I'm like, and again, there's a story in there's other stories of like objects singing out in Irish myth, like the Lou story where Cian is killed, his father, killed by the sons of Turin. And he before he's murdered, he says to his murderers, whatever weapon you use will call out your guilt. And so they stone him. with the stones of the road. And so of course the next time his son is walking along that road, the stones start calling out to him and saying, the sons of Turin killed your father. So like it is that kind of, there's all kinds of little different things.
There's a lovely example of exactly what Sarah was describing earlier on in music. There's this folk song, "The Wind and the Rain," where about there's two sisters and one of them kills the other. She drowns her in a river out of jealousy over a buccal, and the bones are taken out of the river and made into a fiddle. And when the fiddle is played, it plays "Oh, the wind and the rain," and tells the story in the same fashion.
It's a really interesting kind of, I don't know if you'd call it a trope or a story type, or how, classification of stories. Because there's so many, like there's so many little folk tales that and they all have this idea of like, you cannot keep a secret. Keeping a secret is destructive. And it
comes out.
Which is, I always think the psychology of these things is really interesting, because it's so very kind of psychologically true that like if you try and deny something, if you try and repress something, if it doesn't come out in the story in your words, it comes out in your actions. Like you will act out whatever it is you're trying to deny, or whatever it is you're trying to not do. And like it's really interesting to see it. Like I think you see it more in the Lowry story, like the destructiveness of his acting out is like all of this, he's killing people. Whereas I think in Sarah, in your story, well, I mean, she's also massively destructive in her acting out. But I also think she's quite, I don't know, I kind of
she doesn't give a fuck.
I have a terrible bias that I absolutely have to own, which is that I absolutely love a stone cold bitch.
Yeah, she doesn't give a fuck.
Doesn't give a fuck and goes for it. Like she wants that guy, she's gonna get that guy, she's gonna make herself into a rock star so that she can shag the guy. That's it. That's what she cares about. And she's going to turn her whole family into a magic fiddle so she can do it. Like, I kind of respect it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I like that. I mean, I like her obsessiveness, and in the original ones, she gets sucked down to hell. I think her and the guy both get sucked down to hell. But I just decided not to do that. Or you could say maybe she is in hell because she doesn't seem to be able to care. Maybe that's a kind of hell, depending on how you see it. But I think at the time, this is another thing I think that fed it, that I was thinking a lot, because everybody was having conversations about what we do about the art of people that we know have done terrible things. So like the art of monsters, and do we watch films by so and so, can we still listen to music by so and so, and that conversation was in the air a lot when I was working on this story. And I think I don't have answers to those questions, by the way. I mean, I suppose I have personal answers, but not well-formed ones. But I do, something that I think about, and I think my feelings on it change. And so I think that's what the end of it. I think that's what was me sort of like tentatively trying to explore that. And actually, again, it's another revelation. It's a bit like the revelation in yours, Rue. Like, it's not, people are a bit like, oh well, I mean, I know they're not really, because he thinks they are, because he's so good at reading the room. What did he say? Which is great. Sorry, I think I went on a tangent there.
No, it was a good tangent. It was
we're here for the tangents. Like,
we're here for the tangent.
That's where the gold happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Wandering down a tangent. But no, I think that's I'm with you on not having a clear answer on that, but I'm also with you on, like, I think that is something to sit with and wrestle with and think about, and not allow ourselves to forget about. Because it is one of the things about, art and culture, and it's also in your story, Rue, this idea of like, who do we value? Like there was a headline last week about R. Kelly finally getting some consequences for his, incredibly destructive and predatory behavior towards mostly young Black girls. And the fact that he got away with it for so long says a huge amount about how much that culture values young Black women. And like, you see those things, and I think that's why it's kind of, I don't know, that to me is why if we tell these stories and we don't lean into the dark, I think there's a lot that gets lost. And I think there's a lot of like good, meaty stuff for even just for consideration, if not for conversation, that we end up just kind of cutting out because it's a little bit uncomfortable. I think it should be fucking uncomfortable. I think if you're not a little bit uncomfortable some of the time, you're asleep. You know what I mean? You gotta kind of find the uncomfortable bit and like just poke it with a stick a little bit and see what's going on there.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think that's partly why, when I spoke about this story really disturbing me, I think it's probably good that it does disturb me. Maybe it hasn't disturbed me enough. I don't know. Maybe I need to go away and get re-disturbed again and again. But there's an article that I remember reading around that time that was, I think, probably written in 2017, called The Art of Monstrous Men. And the author was talking about, I think she was talking about herself as a woman. And first of all, she was talking about her relationship with certain directors, certain writers, and her struggles with wanting to watch things and feeling a bit like about it. And then she was considering, like, because she's a writer and she has finished things, all art is a little bit monstrous and barbaric because you have to be selfish. And now she was thinking to herself, am I selfish enough to be truly great? Like, actually, if I was more selfish, would my work be better? And that was an interesting question I remember kind of like mulling over at the time as well.
It's an interesting idea because I think there was definitely an idea in the water for a long time about the great individual, the visionary individual who, presumably coalesces out of the ether with nobody to raise him or inform him, and he is almost always a man.
And single genius.
The singularity of genius. Whereas, I know what my feelings are about that, because from my experience and from my kind of observations of the world, that is a myth. That is a myth in the sense of it being untrue, because anybody who's done something singularly great or had something singularly great attributed to them has a huge amount of support and often has some kind of community around. No, not always. There are some exceptions. There are some kind of lone figures out in the wilderness just doing what they're doing, and they're totally unappreciated in their time, and people discover them usually after they're dead and go, hang on, this person was really onto something. But for the most part, I think people who are especially lauded in their own time, there's a community around them. There's something around them that is bolstering them, and those kinds of communities can become enabling and can become, they can get really, really kind of toxic and sour. And it's an interesting thing, because I do think there is, I also kind of see what you're saying about the selfishness of creativity, that there is a certain amount of like, no, I'm gonna go do this. I'm not gonna go, I'm not gonna go feed the starving. I'm gonna go work on this story for hours and hours and hours. This is how I'm gonna spend my time. And by the way, don't fucking bother me. You know what I mean? Like, there's a kind of because you need that focus to be able to get into it. I don't know. What do you think, Ruth?
Yeah, it's a funny question to have to grapple with, and I don't know. I mean, like, I suppose that, like, there is art that has been created by some figures who've turned out to be really controversial. Like, say, I've really enjoyed the films of Woody Allen, for example. You know what I mean? And like, I don't know how. It's a weird spanner in the works then for these revelations to come out afterwards. But like, I don't know if like how that changes the piece of media that I've enjoyed. this thing of like the death of the author, I can subscribe a bit to that, you know,
Yeah.
that like the piece of work is created by the individual, and then it's like birthed and put out in the world, and it's its own entity then, and it's and you don't actually have to worry so much about the author. I don't know, I think I would lean towards that personally.
I think I'm kind of, I don't know, I think I, like yourself, Sarah, I don't have a definitive kind of ruling on it. And I think it's very kind of case by case for me.
Sure, yeah.
Because I think it's kind of like, is this person still benefiting from people appreciating their work? You know, is this person, because I think, like, for me, the issue is not sometimes artists do shitty things, because everybody does shitty things sometimes.
Yeah.
People are, you know, I'm not going to say people are terrible, but you know, that, but without those words. But like,
You can say people are terrible.
It's not unique to artists to do shitty things, or to have bad behaviors, or to be abusive, or to be predatory. It's not unique to artists, nor priests, nor politicians. But I think for me, the sticky bit, and it's something that's definitely in your story, Rue, and kind of in your story as well, Sarah, like in terms of the power of celebrity. Because to me, the thing is power. That when people are in positions of power, that proportion of people who's, you know, who lack that empathy, or who have impulses that they don't know what to do with, or whatever the particular cocktail of ingredients that makes them hurt other people, they get insulated from the consequences.
Yeah.
And it's because people see their work and see their art and see their genius, which I don't think are lessened by the bad behavior. Like, I don't think somebody like Picasso was a fucking horribly abusive person to all of his wives and girlfriends, as far as I can tell. But like, that doesn't make his, you know, I still remember standing in front of the picture of Guernica. I'd seen it in art books, and when I was in the museum standing in front of it, I just got this like almost physical impact. It knocked me back a step, because it was so fucking powerful for me. And like, the fact that that was created by a fucking asshole doesn't make it less powerful for me. But then again, he's not still around abusing women because of people paying to see his painting. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's a knotty one. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And as I said, I don't even know where I am with the knots myself. I imagine somewhere a little where you are. I don't think my appreciation of a piece of work has ever been diminished by knowing something about its maker so far. But you know, maybe tomorrow.
It's funny, isn't it? You look at these things, and then of course we're dealing with material for storytelling that is almost sort of by definition authorless. Like, who came up with the Devils Violin is an unanswerable question.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then again, this is the whole thing. It's almost you know, what you were talking about earlier about asking somebody else to tell the story that you normally tell. That's almost like the opposite of this kind of ego. This is my story, and this is how I do it, and these are my words, which I think is quite hard to let go of, actually. Sometimes, you know, I can get quite attached over like a story that I've, I don't know, quote unquote, made or crafted. I'm a bit like, oh, that's what I do.
I bet. Yeah. I mean, there's a reason that Rue described it as me and Aaron having a fight, because usually it is preceded by one of us being like, no, I want to do it. No, I don't. No, fucking mine. And then, because it's hard. It's a little hard to let go of. But I also think there's something about, like, you know, the way we deal with artistic production now, and the whole idea of like copyright, and especially the way that that's getting extended and extended and extended, you know, things that are part of the Creative Commons, you know, things that are in the public domain. The public domain keeps getting pushed back by Walt Disney, so that they don't let the mouse into the public domain. So it is now so much more time than it used to be.
Oh, really? I didn't realize that.
Yeah, they take a lawsuit every time it runs out, and they get an extension, and then that applies because it's precedent. But like we're very kind of, you know, I was thinking about this in terms of you know, there aren't many films or TV shows about Irish mythology, which is fine by me. In many ways, like they're less known, but also nobody's fucked it up too badly yet. And there's of course all these disputes about, you know, Marvel characters, and some of the Marvel characters are the Norse gods. And can you copyright, you know, the horned helmet that Loki wears in the first time he shows up in a film? Because that also shows up in older depictions of the god Loki. So what, how, where does that, like that whole tangle of questions around like who owns that character, and like what about that character do they own, or what about that story do they own? I think it just, for me, it really feels like a shutting down of creativity, because I think one of the wonderful things about not just storytelling, but also kind of the sort of democratization of content creation that the internet has brought about is that people can take their stories and be like, I didn't like the ending, I'm doing it, I'm gonna do a different ending, and I'm gonna draw a painting of this person, and I'm gonna make them a different gender or a different race, and I'm gonna do what I like with them. And I kind of love that.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's just it's a net good for all of humanity. Like, people do their own weird creative shit with stuff that's online, but I also think the fact that there's such ownership over these ideas is something that gives me serious pause. Because it's also balanced then with, like, I think artists should be paid for their work, and I think artists should be compensated, and, you know, because their work is work and their work is valuable. So anyway, sorry, I've been talking for a while about copyright.
It's another really thorny isn't it? It's an interesting kind of jumble of thoughts to kind of unravel, isn't it? I think this is Ben Haggerty kind of started the Crick Crack Club. I think this is him. He says, you know, so storytellers are thieves, but there's got to be honor among thieves, because of course, you know, you're stealing stories all the time, you're listening, you're getting inspired, but you don't stand up and, I don't know, recite word for word something that you've heard, you know, one of your dear colleagues do, and claim that it's from you. You know, that's a different
Yes.
kind of not
That's
a
a
good
different
spirit.
theft. No, you're right.
Yeah.
And I like, yeah, because that's the kind of a thing you'll hear it among Irish storytellers, definitely, that somebody will say, this is a story and I had it off so and so, and they had it off so and so, and like there'll sometimes be a little bit of a lineage of a story, like this was told to me by this person who heard it from this person who was literally there, you know what I mean, that kind of like pedigree.
And I think, you know, that's wonderful, isn't it? You know, because that's like a lovely respect, and then you take it and you tell it the way that you tell it, with your lens on the world. And it's always going to be different. But yeah, I totally agree. Like, I've never read any of it, but I'm quite interested in like fanfic. You know, like I want to like know more about it, because I'm really sort of intrigued by how it works, and like I know it's such a huge thing.
Oh yeah, but that's like, this is what's great, because great and terrible. Because of course, when everybody can create stuff, 99% of everything that everybody creates is rubbish. But like, you know, maybe not quite that much, but you know what I mean? There's just like, like everything on the internet, it's just so much of it is just a kind of a churn of like, not great or not quite there yet, or whatever else, and you have to go looking for the stuff, I think, that speaks to you. And that's not this I think goes to the power thing as well, because that's so much less curated these days. You know, it used to be very much curated. Like Woody Allen was a big director because his films were shown in the art house. Whereas there might have been a director of equal talent down the road and her films weren't shown at all. Do you know what I mean? Like there's kind of the ways in which these things are filtered have changed. And of course that's not without its own issues. You know, I can sit here and say, hi, I'm a medical expert. Listen to me when I talk to you about viruses and vaccines. And people will go, well, nobody's telling her to shut up. So
it's great to know, actually, because I have some questions. I have been looking for an expert.
Yeah. No, I'm an expert. I'm an expert in everything. I have a very authoritative tone of voice. It's very deceptive. I know nothing.
Yeah, and you're on the internet, like, so.
Surely they wouldn't let her on the internet if she didn't know what she was talking.
They wouldn't.
These great guardians. Well, listen, folks. Shall we wrap up? Thank you both so much for joining, and thank you both so much for sharing your stories and your thoughts. And thank you so much, everybody who's listening. Look at that, I remembered. And Sarah, you're on the people can find you on the Embers Collective. Is there anything else that you've got going on that you'd like to mention?
No, not right now, actually, but that's okay. But yeah, you can find me on the Embers website and all the other kind of Embers social media and that kind of stuff. And I will be up to more things, I think, later in the year and beginning of the next. I hope, fingers crossed.
Yes, indeed. Well, speaking of fingers crossed, we've got a few shows coming up in October, so keep an eye out for what is it? Shadows of Samhain. It's going to be in Whelan's. It's going to be in Puka Festival, and we're going to be doing some shows. And thank you guys so much. We will see you next time. And you.